friend of mine has a jet-powered Luton Minor. He'd offered me a go in it, so on a bright spring morning I headed up to Devon. The Luton Minor was in part designed as a result of the failure of the Flying Flea. Simple and brilliant in theory, but apparently capricious in practice, many designers tried to improve the Flying Flea. Amongst their ranks was Cecil Latimer Needham, chief designer of the Luton Aircraft Company. His design, the LA-2, was a curious mixture of Flying Flea and conventional aeroplane, with 3-axis controls but tandem wings. By the spring of 1937, sanity had prevailed. The LA-2 became the LA-3 with a single Parasol wing. To save money, as much of the old aeroplane was used in the new. The engine was an Anzani V-twin of 35 horsepower. It had 4 valves per cylinder and had been developed for the Flying Flea market that never happened. In time, the factory built a second aircraft, with extended, more conventional aircraft undercarriage and a 40 horsepower ABC Scorpion flat twin, but from the outset, the Luton LA-3, now known as the Luton Minor, was designed for amateur construction. Drawings, parts and materials were available from Luton Aircraft, and a complete set of Luton Minor plans was serialised in Noon's Practical Mechanics magazine. Mr. William Mason, foreman of the sheet metal shop at Short Brothers, Rochester, built a Luton Minor, assisted by his wife, in their house in Chatham. Mason modified the design, making the wing 2-piece, with the ability to be folded so he could tow the Luton Minor behind his car. Unfortunately, the antics of the Austrian corporal scuppered Mr. Mason's flying dreams. The Luton Minor was stored for the duration and then given to an Air Training Corps squadron in 1945. Perhaps the most well-known of the pre-war Luton Minors is this one, known for years and for obvious reasons as Gaffer. Gaffer was built by Stephen Squires, a garage proprietor from Leicestershire. He'd previously built a Flying Flea, its one and only flight ending halfway up a tree. Enthusiasm undimmed, Squires set about building a Luton Minor, using the Anzani V-twin salvaged from the Flea. An authorisation to fly was issued by the Air Ministry in July 1938. Squires flew some 20 hours before engine failure put him in a cornfield. Stored for the duration, a very shabby-looking Gaffer was sold to young Arthur Aldhume in 1949. Not only did Aldhume rebuild Gaffer, twice as it turns out, he also created a new set of drawings, the originals having been destroyed in a fire. In time, he formed Phoenix Aircraft Limited with Cecil Latimer Needham to provide drawings and parts for the Luton Minor and the Luton Major. The whole story of the Luton Minor is recounted in Arthur Aldhume's very amusing book on homemade wings, published in the late 1990s. After 50 minutes or so, I was somewhere near Eggersford. With a GoPro mounted under the wing of the Luton Minor, it was goggles on, chocks away, and we all know what the last chat back is. The GoPro was mounted on a slim wooden handhold at the end of the Luton Minor wing. It was noticeable that camera vibration decreased when I closed the throttle. After 20 minutes flying and 3 landings, it was time to give the airplane back to its owner. Well, that was splendid fun. Unfortunately, the GoPro messed around. I don't know why. It's some strange thing between the GoPro and my camera, and it conked out as I taxied in. So unfortunately, you didn't get me shutting it down or anything. Anyway, that was absolutely terrific. Right, well, we can have a quick look around the cockpit whilst we're here. I don't know whether you can see the throttle, but it's there. The control stick has got 2 handles on it for each brake. So left handle for left brake, right handle for right brake. The right brake wasn't very good, but it didn't matter. Mag switches, airspeed, vertical speed indicator. Didn't get it to go up very often. Altimeter, oil temperature, oil pressure, see rev counter, compass, and a slip ball. Couldn't really see what was going on with the fuel gauge, but it was pretty much full when I left and only flew for 20 minutes, so it's still fairly full now. All too soon it was time to say my thank yous and goodbyes. It was quite novel having a man to twiddle the propeller. It was noticeable how much shorter the Aeronca takeoff roll was, and it was climbing at a good 400 feet per minute instead of the 250 feet per minute I'd managed to coax out of the Luton. The Aeronca, with me on board, all my clutter, and more than enough fuel to get me back home, weighed about 100 pounds more than the Luton Minor. Maybe this demonstrates how good the single-seat Aeronca C3 will be when it's finished, but I don't think a direct comparison between the Aeronca and the Luton Minor is very fair. The key to the Aeronca's success is that enormous wing. Each panel is 18 feet long, light, rather complicated, and construction is not for the faint-hearted. The Luton Minor in itself is a very charming and practical aeroplane. Simple to build and not taking up too much room, it's no surprise that the British newspaper archive contains dozens of snippets and articles about chaps building Lutons in their garages. Hundreds of sets of plans were sold over the years, and the British Register shows 47 Luton Minors. A particular favourite of mine is this one, built by Bill Goldfinch in Salisbury. Bill Goldfinch had served as an RAF officer during the Second World War. Captured, he was incarcerated at Stalag Luft III, better known as Colditz. To pass the time and possibly escape, Goldfinch and several fellow British officers built a glider secretly in a loft at Colditz. This endeavour was unwittingly aided by their German captors, who carelessly left a book about sailplane construction, oddly enough written by Cecil Latimer Needham, in the prison library. Maybe inspired by this story, Arthur Aldhume built 2 more Luton Minors in the loft of his bungalow in Sandown on the Isle of Wight. Unlike the German goons, one can't help but think that Mrs. Aldhume probably knew about it. I got back to Roach in the late afternoon, having stopped off at Bodmin to give a flying lesson in a Cessna. It's not often that one gets to fly 2 splendid jet-powered aeroplanes in a day. It had been a particularly good day. Thank you for watching.